Welcome back to Wednesday night worship. It is great to be back here tonight, to see all of you here this evening. I'm going to talk a little bit about tonight. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about first what the rest of the year is going to look like. And so one of the things we're going to do this year is once a month, every 4 weeks or so, is we're going to have one of our deacons come in to give their testimony. I want to do this. I talked to Justin about this and several others, and people love the idea. This does a couple of things for us. One, it lets you, the congregation, know who your church leaders are. Because the truth is that most of you don't know who they are. Even when I looked at our active deacons list, I knew most of them, but I didn't even know all of them, and I'm a staff member. I've been here for 15 years, and I didn't know who they all were. And so we're going to start with our North deacons, and we'll have one of those guys in at the first week in February, and so we'll start with them. And the other thing that's going to do is it's going to let us hear their story and how God's working in their lives, how they became a deacon, so that you not only know their face and know their name, but you know a little bit about them. We're going to do this same process with your ministers as well. We'll probably work them in during the summertime, and so that you can not only know, hey, I'm Eliot, that's Justin, and you know who Dalton is and Norm, but you know our story. You know our testimony, you know how we came to faith, you know how we became ministers, so that you know a little bit more about who we are and how you can interact with us and the commonalities and know that, hey, we're all in this fight together. And thirdly, what it's going to do, it's going to let you hear from different people from your church, people that are teaching your kids, people that are teaching your youth, people that are teaching you guys. And so it'll be good for you to hear different perspectives, different voices, and different teachers who are just as authoritative as myself and Justin when we stand up here and talk about God's Word. Does that make sense? Yes? No? Maybe so? Yeah? I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited about it. I'm excited to hear some of these guys' stories because I haven't heard them myself. And so I'm excited to hear from some of these guys, and I've known some of them for years, and I just haven't had the opportunity to sit down with them and ask and whatnot. So I'm excited to be able to hear their testimonies and hear that. But to kick things off, the first thing we're going to do tonight is you're going to get to hear my testimony. You're going to get to hear my story. And so we're going to carry this idea of character study through not only Bible characters, but through your deacons and your ministers. And so what we're going to do tonight is we're going to start off with me telling my story. And so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at my favorite passage, and we'll look at this for just a few minutes. But my favorite passage is Psalm 91, verses 1 and 2. If you want to turn there while I'm doing the same, it's also on the screen. Psalm 91, verses 1 and 2. And it says this: "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust." This is has always been a very special passage to me. I heard this passage preached when I think I was a junior in high school when I heard this passage preached. We were at a winter retreat camp. The church that I was currently attending, and you'll hear a little bit more about this later, the church I was currently attending was going through a big split itself and having a lot of issues. But we had just gotten a new youth minister, and we had already planned this winter retreat. And so I still went with them my family was there, my brothers, my sisters, my cousins, lots of friends, all this kind of stuff. And the speaker that was there spoke on this passage. And for whatever reason, it just really, through the years since then, it's just stuck with me. And even when I was in seminary and I was taking Hebrew, we were given the job of choosing a passage and translating it into our own translation. And this is the passage I did verses 1 to 10 when I was in school. Translated it myself from the original language, wrote a paper, did a presentation, did the whole bit. But can we put the verse back up there? A couple of things I just want to point out about this verse that just kind of sticks out to me, and it's just key words that I always kind of go back to. The first is he who dwells in shelter. That dwelling and shelter part is when you dwell somewhere, it means you kind of stay on it and you stay there. It's not a quick, hey, I'm going to stop by for a few seconds and say hi and then kind of jet out, right? It's something that you kind of stay on and meditate on and think on, and you stay there. And so this passage starts out with just talking about dwelling in not my shelter, not some place that I found, but in the shelter of who? The Most High. And when you dwell there, when you stay there, when you stay with Him in that place, you abide in the shadow of the Almighty. Now, when you stand over your children, do they produce a shadow over you? No. But you generally produce a shadow over them, right? Especially when they're little bitty. And generally, when you produce that shadow over them and you kind of cover them up, whether it's in a hug or whatever, it's that sign of protection, right? They feel safe. When they come running up to you when you get home, I know this experience not because I have kids, but because I have lots of nieces and nephews. And my brother and his kids lived with me for a little while, and so I got to hang out with them all the time after school. And I got to experience that. I was the fun uncle at the time. And so when I would come home, I would have that same experience of just wrapping them in a big hug and just holding on to them. And knowing that if anybody wanted to hurt those kids, and even still to this day, if anybody wants to hurt those kids, they would have to go through me. It's that idea of just being enveloped in that protection and that safety. And that's the picture that you get here. You will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. And it's hard to imagine someone overshadowing even me. I mean, I'm a big dude. There's not a lot of people that can produce a shadow over me, but I know that God can. And that level of protection. And then for me, the key verse that I just love, and I say this all the time to myself, is that verse 2. I will say to the Lord, let's say this together, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. And what I love about that is the fact that there's a personal nature to that statement, right? It's not our God who we trust, which is true, right? But there's a personal nature to it. He is my God in whom I trust. Me personally, I'm very quick to trust people for the most part. Unless for some reason I just have a movement in my spirit that just feels off, I'm very quick to trust somebody and take them at their word. But when that trust is broken, it is very difficult to get it back. There has to be a lot of evidence for me to be able to trust you again. Has God ever broken a promise or not been trustworthy? or not done what he's told me to do? Not one time. Because he is my God whom I can trust. And so that's my favorite passage, and just a real quick kind of just devotional thought about it, and I love it. It's one of, people talk about life verses and all that kind of stuff. If I had to choose a life verse, that would be it. Because of that personal nature of God being someone that I can trust and that will never let me down, a place of safety and a place of protection, and somewhere that I can always be. So, with that having been said, I'm going to grab a drink of water because I'm thirsty. With that, we're going to jump right into my story. And so, part of what I've asked the deacons to do is do that very same thing in sharing their favorite passage and giving us short little devotional talk on it and whatnot, and then move into their story. And so now my story. First, just a little biographical information. I am the oldest of, or not the oldest, the second oldest of 5 kids. My dad passed away 9 years ago this March. My mom lives in Baytown with most of my family. My youngest brother is a youth minister up in Carthage. We grew up in the church. My family's always been very active in church. I struggled with this for a long time. I don't have a testimony of I went off and was a wild child and got into drugs and alcohol and, in and out of jail and my life got turned around and now I'm a believer and everything's good and God's doing all this kind of crazy stuff in my life. I don't have that testimony. But you know what? My testimony is my story, and it is just as important and just as powerful as people who have that kind of testimony. And I am grateful for the life that God has given me, and I am grateful that He had protected me from those kinds of things, and that He has kept me from those kinds of things. And to look back on my life to see how God has used individuals in my life to guide me and to show me and to open doors for me is just as powerful. I didn't always make the right decisions. I always, sometimes, and you'll hear this in a minute, I made really poor decisions sometimes. And God used people in my life to gently nudge me back in the right direction. And so my family we grew up in the church. I mean, we were one of those families that if the doors were open, we were there. I prayed to receive Christ when I was about 8 years old. My pastor's name was Brother Richard Steele. He was a missionary down in Mexico for a long time and was a pastor at Cedar Bible Baptist Church in Baytown, Texas. And so I remember I actually called there today trying to find my actual baptism certificate. And the precious young lady that was talking to me on the phone, I could just tell from her voice that it was way before anything that she would even recognize. And I'm not that old. I'm only 38 years old. Like, it's not that long ago. But I knew that it was before anything was digital. And so I told her, I was like, I don't know that y'all are going to have this, but if you do, I would love to get a copy of it or at least know the information on it. And lo and behold, because it was before digital stuff, they found several of my siblings and my cousins and other people, but they couldn't find, my record got lost somewhere along the way into the transition into the digital world. And so, anyways, I got baptized a couple of weeks later, but I remember the day that I prayed to receive Christ because of a couple of things that happened. My dad didn't always go to church all the time. He was not the spiritual leader in our household. That was very much my mother, and which I'm very grateful for. That changed later in life before he passed away. started becoming super active, was on personnel committees and all kinds of stuff. And so I was grateful to see that happen later, even if it was later in life. I was in church one morning, and my siblings were all sitting with their friends in other places. I remember I was sitting on the front row, though. And our church had gotten to a point where our sanctuary wasn't big enough, and so we would meet in our gym, where we would set up chairs every single week and then tear down for gym activities during the week and then have to set it back up. And so I remember sitting on the front row and my mom sitting up in the choir loft, and I kept motioning for her to come down. And so I'm sitting on the front row by myself, and I kept trying to motion for her to come down. This is when the choir didn't leave during the sermon time, so she's sitting up there this entire time. And I'm like, come down here, come here. And she's like, no, stop it. And I'm like, no, come here. I need to talk to you. And so finally, super awkward, because she's sitting like in the middle of her row. It's not like she's sitting on the very end where she can just kind of sneak down. She's like having to scoot by people. She's like, excuse me, I'm sorry. And she's having to scoot down and come down. And she finally comes down. And she's like, what do you need? And I told her, I was like, I want to go up and talk to Brother Steele. And I told her, I want to go up and I want to pray to receive Jesus. And I remember that being like the official day, but I remember praying that same prayer in the back of our station wagon at different times, and just knowing that that's what I wanted to do, knowing that I needed Jesus. Now, again, 8 years old, do I know all of the theological ins and outs of Scripture and the depth of depravity and all of those kinds of things? No. Had I really done anything, in the way we would say it, anything that terrible at 8 years old? No. But did I know that I needed Jesus? Yeah, I did. And so I prayed to receive Christ that day. And 2 weeks later, on a Sunday night, I know it was a Sunday night because we were in our sanctuary and not in the gym. In our sanctuary in the baptistry, he baptized me, and I started my walk with Christ. And so that's my salvation story. That's how I came to know Christ. And so after that, I grew up going to church, doing the Bible study. We had discipleship groups on Sunday nights instead of Bible study, which is a little bit, the smaller groups had a little bit more intentionality. Got to know our youth ministers and teachers and stuff really well during those times. But when I was probably a sophomore in high school, our church, the church that I grew up in, went through a really bad split. There was a huge scandal that had gone on. The education guy had an affair with the head secretary, and the church wanted to cover it up and not tell the church. They sent the education guy off with a big severance thing and a party and saying he was just going off to do this other thing. And the music minister was very upset about it, and he told everybody, and the deacons and the other church leaders didn't like that, and so they forced him out, and my mom was caught up in the middle of it, where I'm sitting here in the youth going, I don't know what's going on. We just got a new youth guy, and I like him. So, so all of this stuff is going on, and so the church kind of splits. My parents, my mom mainly, decides to leave Cedar Valley Baptist Church, and again, I'm in the youth group going, this has nothing to do with us. Why are you making us leave? We're still kids really at the time. We don't really understand everything that's going on. And so, I kind of maintained a lot of contact because that's where all my friends were. That's where my cousins went. That's where, I had all of my connections. So I maintained a lot of connection there. When I finally got to drive, I would still go there from time to time for youth and that kind of stuff. But we left, and so we moved to another church. And did we move to a church that I wanted to go to? Nope, did not. There was a church in town, Second Baptist of Baytown, which is still one of the larger churches in town. That's where all of my friends in school went. Any of my school friends that went to church, they went to Second Baptist, most of them. And so when we were going around and visiting different churches, and we visited that one, I loved it because I knew everybody there. And I had a lot of fun. The youth group was amazing. It was huge. It was really exploding at the time, and I just really, really enjoyed it. My mom, not so much. And so we ended up going to another church, which is Memorial Baptist Church, where I did not know anybody. I think I knew one person, I knew one kid who I happened to go to elementary school with that went to church there. Other than that, I didn't know anybody. And so in my rebellion, I said, I am not doing anything. And I refused to do anything. I did not participate in choir. I did not participate in youth group. I did not do any. I went to church because mom said I had to go to church. And so I went to church, and that was it. Oddly enough, I ended up getting a job at the church. So my title was a recreational assistant. They had a gym with a racquetball court and a fellowship hall and all that kind of stuff. And so my job was they had open gym nights and different activities. People could rent the church out and all that kind of stuff. And so I set up and tore down and ran the gym and worked different things with a crew of people. And so that first summer that we were there, my entire family, including my mom and my siblings, except for my dad didn't go. Most of my siblings, though, and my mom ended up going on a mission trip. And she asked if I wanted to go, and I said no. Which, if you know me now, you're like, no, there's no way. Because missions is like my thing. I love missions. I love doing mission work. And so for me to say no to a mission trip, like thinking back, I was like, what was I thinking? Why would I not go do this? But it was that rebellion. It was that I didn't get my way, and so I'm going to show mom and do what I want to do and not go. In doing that, all of my coworkers went, so that means that I got to work that 2-week period by myself of indoor soccer, and that was awful. I had to set up 4x8 sheets of plywood every single week by myself so that they could have an indoor soccer ring to play on. Do all I had to do the devotionals during halftime. And so because there was nobody else there, I had to do all of them all day long. So I did the same devotional probably like 15 times a day for 2.5 weeks. It was so bad. And so, of course, when they get home, I'm hearing all of these wonderful stories of all these fantastic things, and I'm just kind of like, whatever, I still don't want to do anything. But my mom, being the wonderful mother that she is, said enough's enough. You're going to participate. You're going to be a part of things, and you're going to do what you need to do. And so, with that, I got involved in the youth group. I got involved with choir. I was in choir for 12 years. I led praise and worship team while I was in high school. I did all of the things, did all that stuff. So yes, if you hear me singing, that is me. You're not just hearing things. I'm very loud when I sing. Dalton tells me all the time he can hear me from the balcony, especially if it's a song I really enjoy. But so I got involved in all of these things and eventually even leadership team. Come to find out, the youth minister that was at Memorial Baptist Church actually started at the exact same time as my youth minister from Cedar Bayou. And, you know, God's just funny sometimes how he's like, no, you're going to go over here, but you're still going to be connected to this thing because it's a good thing. Those two guys actually became like really, really good friends. And so we got to hang out with them all the time. We actually started doing youth camps together. The same kind of thing that we have here with Dalton and Daniel and that kind of stuff, and the way relationships happen. And so God still let me be a part of a lot of my old friends from back there, but he had plans for me in this new place. And so one last thing about Cedar Bayou, Dennis Larson, the youth minister they brought in, is actually the guy that got me started running sound. One of his first weeks there, he asked me, how many of you, I need someone to help me run sound, who wants to do it? And I was like, well, I'll do it. And he walked me over to the soundboard, and he goes, if my guitar needs to be louder, turn this knob. If I need to be louder, turn this knob. And I was like, okay. Looking back on it, what he told me to do was a huge mistake in running sound. The knob that he told me to turn, you don't touch that knob. That's like, no, like you set that and you leave it. It was the gain, for those that understand. He told me to turn the gain up, and I was like, no, you don't, like volume, yes, which is the little sliders on the board, yes, you can move that all day long. You don't touch the gain. That you leave alone. Anyways, when I got to Memorial, got to know Jeff Weldon, who was my youth minister in Memorial. He got me plugged in even more so. Running sound. He's the guy that really taught me how to run sound, how to install equipment, how to do video editing. It got me started with photography stuff, all of those kinds of things. And that's really where my service in youth ministry and ministry stuff really, really got kicked off. And that probably wouldn't have happened if I had stayed where I was. But I had to go through a lot of ups and downs and different places and challenges and all that kind of thing to get to where I was. Ended up doing youth camps, which I still do youth camps. I love doing youth camps and doing video projects there. Now, this is back when we had to use like cassette tapes to edit and all that kind of stuff, ginormous VCRs and stuff. And I remember we went to a youth camp, and they were actually editing with like stacks of VCRs where you have to play one and then record on another one and do all these different kinds of, it was nuts. Anyways, and now we're in this world where I can do more on my phone than I can with an actual camera. It's ridiculous. But all that to say, my time ended there in 2003. I moved out because I moved out here to Beaumont to go to college. Started there, and I actually went back the summer of 2004 to be the youth intern at my church. My youth minister there he didn't leave, but he was transitioned into a different position, and so he was more of a media creative arts director guy, and so they needed someone for the youth ministry, and so I went there to be the youth minister for the summer. Me and a girl who had interned before. So she worked with the girls, I worked with the guys. I remember planning the entire summer calendar and doing everything. The funniest thing about that was my youth minister at the time. I had planned to do bowling the first week in August because it was my birthday and I wanted to do bowling. And he said, that's going to be a flop. No one wants to do that. Don't do bowling. Do something else. And I was like, no, we're going to do bowling. And so we did bowling, and I ended up having to get like 2 or 3 extra lanes while we were there because so many kids showed up. And turns out the reason he didn't want me to do bowling is because he wasn't good at it. And so he was a super athletic guy, one of those guys that can kind of do everything, and that was like one of the things that he was really, really bad at. He's like, you don't need to do that. You don't want to you do something else. I was like, nah, we're doing this. And so it was a lot of fun. And so when I moved to Beaumont, I actually visited Calvary in 2003, but at the time, there wasn't a college department here, much like here at North, which is why we're trying to launch one and get it up off the ground so that our college students have somewhere to go and be a part of. But at the time, there wasn't anything here. And so I ended up at First Baptist Beaumont in downtown. I remember going to a Bible study on Thursday nights called Open House at Doc and Ann's. I don't know what their names are. All I know is Doc and Ann. That's what everybody called them. I don't know I know he was a doctor. He was a foot doctor, but that's about it. Fantastic, lovely older couple who just loved college students. And it was fantastic getting to know them and meet people there. And it's through that group that I met some other people and ended up going to the BSM. So when I first moved to Beaumont for a long while, for about 2 years, I didn't do anything. I went to church sometimes, not all the time. In fact, made an awful decision to just stop going for about 6 months. In my mind, it made sense. I had gone every single day for the last 5 years, 6 years, hadn't missed a single Sunday, served every time the doors were open. I was there. And the truth of the matter was I was just burnt out. I was just tired. But that doesn't, I'm going to say this. I know some of y'all and a lot of y'all serve so much and do so much. If you're tired, it's fine to take a break, but don't stop coming to church. That was a terrible mistake that I made in just not going to church. And it took me going home and going back to church with family and being back with the family of God to realize that I had made that mistake. And so when I came back, I was much more active in at least going to church and being part of, Sundays morning in church and all that kind of stuff. And then I met some people and ended up going to the BSM. And when I went to the BSM, that's when I started to get more involved again. I started serving at the BSM, joined the leadership team and all this kind of stuff. And that's where I met my good friend, Kristen Funderburg. She was the BSM intern at the time, which if you don't know, a lot of BSM is the Baptist Student Ministry. Some colleges call them the Baptist Student Unions or something along those lines. But it's where the Baptist kids get together and do their church stuff. But the interns, a lot of them, most of them, are, at least for Texas, are missionaries sent out through the Texas Baptist Student Ministry, or Student Services, whatever it is, missions organization, and actually send them to the campuses to do mission work. And so a lot of the BSM interns are actually missionaries sent out through this organization. And that's what Kristen was. And so part of her job is to recruit people to go on mission trips during the summer. And Kristen was relentless. She would just, especially if you were a regular, if you were someone that she had gotten to know, which I had gotten to know her, and been around the BSM all the time, she was relentless, nonstop. Hey, what mission trip are you going on? What are you going to do? What are you doing this summer? Why don't you go on a mission trip? Why don't you do this? What about this? And finally, it came down to the end of the semester. It was probably about 2 weeks before summer, and she looked at me and she goes, what mission trip are you going to go on? And it's like, Kristen, that's not my thing. I don't do that. That's somebody else. Let them do that. And she's like, what would it take for you to do missions, for you to go on a mission trip? And I said, Kristen, if you can find a mission trip that has to do with video and photography, I'll do it. She said, okay, give me just a second. She goes into her office, she gets on her computer, and she looks up the job listings of what the opportunities and all this kind of stuff. And who'd have thunk it? She found one. Goodness gracious. It was a 10-week mission trip to Central Texas doing video and photography for support work for missionaries that are overseas. And I said, okay, I'll do it. And 2 weeks later, I was gone. Raised the money I needed to raise, did all this stuff, which is normally a semester-long process. Like, they start this back in January, and I'm just now doing this in May. But that trip is what opened my eyes to missions and ministry and really being a part of what God is doing. That trip, I got to meet people from all over the world. I got to help people that are all over the world. We did everything as part of this organization. It's called Greater Good Global Support Services. We did everything from helping a student in Egypt who had lost his bags, who was leaving for a backpacking trip the next day, helped him find his luggage. That was our first case for the summer. He was one of our student missionaries, helped him find his luggage. All the way to, this was the summer right after the tsunami hit in Indonesia. I helped a lady who called, who at first said she needed a boat to help do work over in Indonesia. And so I'm looking and I'm like, you know what? There's all kinds of boats. There's everything from a canoe to a speedboat to a bass boat to a yacht. I mean, like, what do you need? Like, what is she wanting to do? And so I call her back and I talked to her and I was like, what do you actually need to do over there? Like, what are you wanting to do? And she's like, well, I'm wanting to house like 40 to 50 workers, possibly a speedboat, medical supplies, building supplies, and all this. I'm like, you don't want a boat, you want a ship. Like, you need a cargo ship. She's like, yeah. And I was like, do you know how expensive? She's like, money's not a problem. Apparently, this lady was like connected with like U.S. representatives and ex-presidents and all this kinds of stuff. She just needed a ship. She didn't know where to find one. And I said, okay, let me do some research. 2 weeks later, I found her a ship. I gave her all the information she needed, told her how to get it, and told her what she needed to do, and sent her on her way. And so it's just been, it was amazing to see what actually goes into doing missions and what that looks like. And I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit. And so that summer really drove me. I've been doing mission trips every year since then until COVID hit. I had gone out of the country. It's funny, one of the jokes I've told people is, since COVID, this is the longest I've been in the U.S. for the last 16 years. Because every year I've gone somewhere since that first trip. Because I know how important it is to do the work. My next year I went, we got to witness to a young man after playing volleyball with him and hanging out with him. And he said, I'll never forget this. In fact, I have a photograph of it. I meant to get it and I didn't. But I have a photograph of this guy while we're talking to him. He said, before I prayed to receive Christ, the world just seemed so dark and gray and hopeless. He said, the moment I finished praying that prayer and opened my eyes, he said it was like a new world. He said everything just seemed so full of life, and that there was now hope in his world. And when he said that, the only thing I could think was that's what I want to do. Because there are places around the world that have no clue. Where you can't throw a rock without hitting a church here, there are places that that have never even heard. And I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to help people go do that. And so from then on, I started doing mission trips every year. And so while I was at the BSM, my last year in college, I met this crazy, bald-headed guy named Stephen Hayes. He was helping to serve lunch one of our Wednesdays while at the BSM, and since I was part of leadership and everything, I met him while Calvary was there serving lunch. This was right when Calvary's college department was really kind of kicking off. And a few weeks, so at the time though, I'm still going to First Baptist, but some of my really, really close friends started going to Calvary. And I got on the visitor roll because they drugged me with them to go to Calvary. I was like, I'm going to First Baptist. Why would I go over here? Like, no, you need to come at least check it out with us. So I said, okay. And so I very well could have been in your Sunday school class during all of this, Justin. But got on the visitor roll, and Stephen Hayes called me again. He didn't know my name. He didn't recognize my name, but I recognized his from having just met him a few weeks prior. And so he calls me while on visitor roll, and we get to talking, and we finally realize, like, hey, we just met at the BSM and all this kind of stuff. And so, we finish up talking. He's like, well, is there anything I can pray for you? And I was like, well, I'm about to graduate from college, and I'm looking for a job. This is a month before I graduate. I said, I'm looking for a job. And so he says, well, do you know anything about media and sound and lights and all that kind of stuff? And I was like, well, just so happens, I did that for about 4 years in my church before I left. He's like, well, we're looking for somebody to do that for us in one of our venues. And I was like, okay. And so he gave me Jeremy Byram's number, which he's one of our media guys in Beaumont. And I wrote it down. I remember I was working at HEB. I helped open the HEB store on Major. And I was sitting in the break room. There was a newspaper in front of me. I remember writing his phone number down. And I was this close to not calling him. I almost didn't call him because I was like, that's probably going to be a part-time gig. I'm looking for like career level job, something that I can live on and all this kind of stuff. And I remember calling him. I was like, let me just call him just to see what this is about. I called him 3 days later, ended up having an interview with Gary and Jeremy and met with them. A week later, the week before that, I had actually had an interview at the hospital, and for an IT position at the hospital. And I remember meeting with Gary and Jeremy. Whoops, sorry. I remember meeting with Gary and Jeremy, and then afterwards, I had gone to volunteer for a weekend at Pine Cove, and I was talking with my buddy Jeremy, and we were kind of talking about the two different positions and which one I should do, which one I should really go for. And after talking to him, I remembered, or I started thinking about it. I was like, you know what, Jeremy? I was like, really, it comes down to money. I was like, I've worked in other jobs and done other things before, but really it comes down to money. And we both agreed and both understood, it's like, if that's what it's about, there's no real choice to be made here. It's like, you know what you need to do. 2 weeks later, I was working here at Calvary. And I've been here for 15 years now. In November, will be 15 years. Harvey hit, things got shifted around, found myself out here at North. And they had a need for an education guy, and Stephen came to me again, said, hey, we want you to do this. I said, okay. And that's what I've been doing for the last 4 years. And so even with as long as that went, I know I'm over time, there's so much that I left out. The way that God has moved to get me to where I am, to be able to serve you here, is just amazing. And I can't wait to see what he does coming up. And so with that, that's my story. As far as it's gotten to so far, those are the highlights. I know that God has more in store, but again, it all falls back on him being the God that I trust. And I know that he's going to take care of me. I know he has a plan because I can look back and see it. And so with that, let me pray, and then we'll break into our groups, and y'all pray very quickly, and we'll wrap up this evening. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I just thank you for tonight. I thank you for this opportunity to be able to just share my story with my friends here tonight, and just so that they can get to know me a little bit better and to know the calling that you've placed on my life and how you have brought me to where I am today. And God, I thank you for bringing me where I am today, and I look forward to the things that you have. God, I look forward to seeing how God uses the individuals in this room. God, I pray that they would not be afraid to share their stories with people and to share their testimony and how God has used them and how you have worked in their lives with people around them and people they meet. So God, I pray for us this week that you would keep us safe and that we would do all that we do for your glory in your name, in your precious Son's name. Amen.